Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to view Career Opportunities. So, this movie ends up focusing a lot on a retail store, and for those of you that don't know what a retail store is, or what a general store is, Targets and Walmarts and places that have like a number of different kinds of items are usually called a general store. Because a lot of times there's like sports stores, and those aren't like general stores, they're just a sports store. So I've spent a number of years working at retail somewhat stores. Working at a Sears, a Kmart, a J.C. Penney's. Every single one of those eventually no longer turned out to exist after a certain time of which that I had been there. So I was like, well, like, there's that for you. So going on and seeing career opportunities and knowing that there is a number of other retail store kind of movies out there, like Black Friday, the horror movie Black Friday, or Silent Night, Deadly Night, which I think I've gone on and reviewed that also. Employee of the Month is one retail store movie that I've never gone on and reviewed, just because I don't really care for the story. But I feel that that movie is also fairly accurate of like a retail store. I think like I can easily say that that is to be a movie that is to actually be retail store accurate. So now looking at all those movies, how accurate is Career Opportunities? Career Opportunities was done in 91, so I don't know how far retail has changed from that time period. But this movie is, as far as a retail store is to go, is so hilariously inaccurate that I'm like, whoever wrote this movie has never spent a day in a retail store in their life. And it seems like this movie is just going off of the fact that somebody had a number of ideas to put a movie out, and they didn't know what really they were talking about, but throwing out certain words. And so this movie doesn't feel at all like a retail store thing that you should show somebody to help them understand what retail life is like. If you went on and you gave them this movie and said, hey, this is what retail stores are like, they would go in and apply for retail store because of like, man, this job seems easy. And then they would find out that it's drastically different than what this movie depicts. So yeah. So for this film, let's go on and let's tee it up here. So we have a guy named Jim Dodge who seems to be the town liar to the point where, like, easily, if this is a small town, you should not hire this man. Because they would be like, oh yeah, like, this is the guy who's a pathological liar who we can't trust, and why would we hire this guy? But it seems that Jim goes on and does all these jobs, to the point of him even working in sales at some point. So it seems that nothing works out, because possibly Jim is to go on and purposely not make any of these jobs work out. I would, of course, know that kind of person. Not me, but I've seen that kind of person. So Jim is to eventually, at the last ditch effort of things, before he is to be driven off to St. Louis. So Jim is to now find himself in front of a retail store called Target to do an interview that he is to go on and do a overnight cleaning job for. Which means he has to go on probably from like 10 at night to 6 in the morning and clean up around this store, which honestly, with this store being that dirty, I would probably say everyone in the store before they left for the night would take a number of hours to clean this store because this store could possibly not be this dirty. But we turn around and then have Jim, who is to finish up his whole entire day's worth of work in like 15 minutes. And so Jim just F's off for the rest of the night until he bumps into Josie, who was to, of course, be this customer who stuck around. So Jim is to talk to Josie and catch up with her, as it seems that they have a history together. And I honestly, like, would not see Josie with a guy like Jim, but odder things have happened in life. So eventually, by the time that these people go on to continue to talk to one another consistently throughout this film, like, it feels like I'm watching the movie, like, The Mannequin, it seems. Like, that's also a retail store movie that I've never gone on and reviewed also, because that movie is just goofy and weird. And they made sequels of it. I don't know why. So, by the end of this movie, we have two thieves that break into the store, which an alarm would go off, so that doesn't make sense. We even have a custodian that I believe ended up turning out all the lights, and you would have thought would have also armed this store before he left. Hence why, like, Jim can't go in and out of this store, because he is to have had an alarm go off if he did. So Nestor and Gil make their way to be these thieves in this story, and they seem to, by roughly the end of the movie, decide to finally steal things in this store. They could have taken hours to thieve away in this store, but decide to, like, within the last 5 to 10 minutes of the movie, like, start compiling things into their vehicle and try and steal it, which they don't eventually get away with. And so eventually there has to be an action sequence that has to play out by the end of this, and then we go on and have this police officer that shows up by the end of the store when the store opens, and we end up getting a happy ending at the end of this, which I will go on and spoilers and talk about. So yeah, nothing really happens in this film. This movie is, as far as a retail example of retail, there is no retail jargon besides health and beauty, which of course is an aisle in a store that has, like, medicine, like common, like, counter medicine, but usually has like a pharmacy right next to it. And then usually it has, like, common stuff like toothpaste or, like, muscle milk, and then has, like, makeup. Like, that's health and beauty. Like, so that's the only technical term being thrown around throughout this whole entire film, because nobody knows the jargon of any of the retail stuff, because there is a jargon, there is a language. And half of the time when I would go into certain retail stores, by the end of my retail experience, people would go on and have certain technical words for things, and I would just go on and be like, never heard of that word before. Could you tell me, like, what that means? Like, what are you talking about? And they're like, oh yeah, it's this thing. And I'm like, why couldn't you have just do one of these? I don't know what you're talking about. And they're like, oh yeah, like, you've never heard of one of these before? I'm like, yeah, I've never. And they're like, oh, okay, great. Like, I'll just, like, oh, okay. Like, so, like, like, half the time, like, they would always have some, like, jargon that I'm just like, I would have to ask them what it meant. and so they would have to actually show me. And plus, I'm a very visual person anyways, so names for stuff I'm not good with, but if they show me what it looks like, then I'm like, oh, okay, then I know what you're talking about, and I'll get to whatever they need anyways, because I'm not good with names of things. So with that said, but I at least know certain names when I have to need to know them at some point, like a conveyor belt that at some point Jim is to be tossed onto. Like, I've known that because I've worked with a conveyor belt for a number of years. Some of them like are like that. Actually, that conveyor belt is a nice looking one. There's certain times where you have to like attach a conveyor belt together to put it into a semi truck, and that is a pain. Uh, because some stores are not set up to like be perfectly set in to welcome a semi truck. And so yeah, like those become some interesting moments. So with that said, let's go on and let's talk about career opportunity, because it's about that time to just go into spoilers. I apologize for how long this whole setup was for a very brief movie that's only an hour and 20 some odd minutes. But I'm hopefully going to ram through this whole entire film because there's a very thin amount of parts of this film. Really, it truly has to like waste a lot of time in this film. There's nothing really going on. So if you want to see this movie, I saw this on an app called Vidlesy, and I'm going to spell it out to you. Vidlesy. I went on to a Google Play Store and was just kind of randomly checking out apps to find if I could watch certain movies, and I found this app, and then I could see career opportunities. So I'm like, heck yeah, I'm going to go on and watch this movie, as well as I did Fletch and Matinee, which I did fairly recently. So kind of telling you exactly when this retail review is to, of course, go out. So without a doubt, I think it's about that time to just go on into that double 5 time territory. It's about that time to just go into what is spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time to spoil this movie. So in the very beginning of it, we have Jim Dodge with this newspaper going on and mentioning that he is to talk about these burglars or these robbers or these thieves that are to be on this newspaper. And so Jim is to go on that he knows a thing or two about crime and so on and so forth because Dodge has spent some time in the FBI, and that he is to go on and do like all kinds of assortment of things and so on and so forth. And so Jim Dodge is saying all this to a plethora of dogs as he's working at this pet store, telling them these lies. So Jim turns around and goes on to tell all of these kids all of these lies also, to say that he's going off to Paris soon and that he'll be back and so on and so forth, and a number of other things. And all these kids are like, oh my god, that guy is so cool. Sure. So Jim is to turn around and be in this pet store, and he is just talking to all these pets. And we immediately have the guy who is to own this pet store, or to be a manager or employee of this pet store, who is firing Jim for him not going on and doing his job correctly. So Jim gets fired from yet another job, and we have his father go on and find him and yell at him. It's like, hey, I heard you like got fired from yet another job. And Jim is to go on and see this girl named Josie at this gas station going on and pumping gas, as Jim is to go on and ask this one gas station manager if he could go on and get hired at this job. And the guy is saying, like, well, no, because, like, I know that you're a liar, and so has everyone else in this whole entire town. So why would anybody hire you? You're better off going into a town that nobody knows how much of a real like piece of that you are, or that, or like a liar that you are. So Jim meets with his father, and so come to find out, Jim's dad is to be like I guess a concrete layer. Like he has a certain kind of vehicle that showcases that. So we have Jim going home to eat dinner with his family, and so Jim is to be around the table eating dinner, and Jim is talking with his sister, and evidently his sister is to hold a bank telling job. At some point, Jim is to mention that. So Jim is talking with his sister, and his sister is giving him crap about him not really having a job. And of course, Jim is to also, I guess, with the way his house is set up now that I guess that he's 18, he now has to pay rent in his home. And so Jim, of course, is to have his parents say, like, well, hey, like, since you don't have a job right now, you're not going to be paying rent, but, like, hey, like, you're going to go on and get a job soon because we know it, because we're going to try to get you another one. So it seems that Jim is to go on and like living at home. He, of course, is to, uh, like the easy life, I guess. So for him, whatever that means. So Jim is to go to sleep and have his father wake him up for another job interview, which of course is to be at Target. So Jim goes on and is to meet with none other than John Candy as C.D. Marsh, which is supposed to be the store manager, which actually in a retail job, you would actually be hired by an HR person, a human resources person. And so there's a lot of times where there's certain stores, they have like one human resource person for sometimes an entire number of stores, where that person has to go on and show up, and then you never hear from them again. Or you have to go on and call them and ask them about certain things, so that way they can adjust stuff or whichever. It's very weird. It's very goofy. But yeah. So, but also there are certain times where in certain stores, the human resource person is to either give you hours or cut your hours. More than likely, a lot of times, from what I've experienced from stores, cut hours. Uh, or it could actually be your supervisor or your manager of your area, which is to go on and do that. Tell you how many hours you're going to get for X number of things. So it should be a human resource person, a store manager. This doesn't make sense immediately. So Jim goes on and speaks with Marsh, and Marsh is going on and having this rant about bear claws. And he's like, well, hey, like, I was wondering if you wanted a bear claw, because I've surely had enough bear claws in my lifetime. Ha ha ha. Like, we have John Candy doing oddly a lot of, like, fat jokes, and I didn't like that at all. But I like that John Candy was in this movie. I like John Candy. I've always, like, Uncle Buck is a freaking amazing film that I haven't seen in such a long time, and I probably should check it out because Uncle Buck is a really great film. I love that film. So John Candy is to go on and talk to Jim here, and I guess he is to get confused of what position that Jim has hired for. Notice I said the word position. Ha 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 ha. So Marsh says here that he's going to want to offer Jim 42.5 for, I'm assuming, a salary for probably a managerial position. And so Jim is to say, it's like, well, hey, you know what? Like, the whole entire time, like, I have a number in my head of 45,000. And as far as the store goes, when they would say 42.5, really, like, they would probably want a ballpark number around there. Like, they would probably go as high as like 43, and that's probably as high as they're willing to go. Like, to jump up like the number of which that Jim is to say would not happen. But so weirdly, Marsh buckles at 45,000, and then is to go on after this guy is still standing here, and is to go on and be talking to this other associate who I don't know who it is. I'm assuming that might have been the actual HR person, to say that this person is not who he should be talking to for this manager job, and instead that this person is just being hired for this uh, overnight cleaning janitorial job. So Marsh is to then go on and is to mention to Jim, it's like, oh, well, I'm sorry. It's like, this is actually what I'm going to go on and offer you, which is $4.44 per hour. I'm like, holy in 91, minimum wage was $4.44. Oh my God. I can say this because it was in 2006 or 7. I was paid about like $7. So in about a decade, and so like 16 or 17 years, minimum wage had went up roughly $4, or not even that, $2 and 60 cents. Yeah, wow, that's crazy to think. So, and then also like within like 90 days after that, I was to go on and get a higher amount of money after 90 days. Uh, but yeah, but like really when looking at it, um, I think the last time I worked at a job was like $10 an hour. So, and more than likely, a lot of people would probably not go on and get that amount of money for a job probably now, or would probably get more than that. I don't know what like retail, as far as after everything has happened with the world the way it is, like how much minimum wage has probably increased. But anyways, maybe I had probably gotten, yeah, about around there. So yeah. Uh, so Jim is to then go on and is to go and do this overnight job. It seems at one point Jim is to call his parents and say like, well, hey, now that I'm working a retail stuff like job, I'm thinking about Christmas, and I'm thinking about all the presents that I could buy for everyone in the house. And like, I guess, yeah, when you would normally probably go on and work at a retail store and you're looking at all these items and you're finally having the time to really assess all of them, of like, wow, this actually is a really good product. Like, a lot of times you end up like buying a lot of stuff at a store that you honestly work at, simply because you have the time to actually look and see if this item would actually be worth getting. A lot of times I would go on in certain retail stores and I would usually buy like a movie that came out or buy a game that came out. Because a lot of times I would go into an electronics department anyways to go through a lot of their movies and video games and stuff. And then eventually I would like peruse through a number of other aisles. So Jim is to talk to his parents, and so like his father ends up getting up and just eating all of these meals. Weirdly dunking this chicken into this peanut butter. I'm like, okay, that's weird, but that looks also very interesting. And like he's going through this sandwich meat, and I guess this guy just can't sleep for whatever reason. And so instead of pounding away more food, his father at some point is at this place drinking coffee with some other man that ends up being Josie's father. So, because Jim ends up, if I hadn't said, Jim had seen Josie at this gas station, and she was going on and pumping gas, and then Jim ends up mentioning that he ended up seeing Josie before, and they had shared a cup of Java together, which wasn't true. But so Josie is to go on and be at her father's house, which is Roger Roy McClellan. Yeah, let's go with that. I said the other names right. So McClellan. Yeah, I said it correct. So Josie goes on to meet with her father and is to see a number of men that Josie immediately wants to go on and figure out a way to make them as uncomfortable as she possibly can. So she kisses one of the men on the lips and then shakes the hand of the other and then walks away. And both of these men are just godsmacked by this woman going on and doing this, as well as her father just being so irritated by his daughter, because we have Roger that is to mention to Josie that he's basically going to beat the crap out of her. Which is awful to say, but that's what this guy weirdly says in this movie. And so Josie goes on into this Target store to buy a bunch of items to possibly shoplift all of them. And Josie then goes on and is to go into this fitting room and lay there and fall asleep. Because she wasn't sure whether or not she wanted to go on and shoplift these items, so she fell asleep in the fitting room. And so we now have Jim that goes on to go to this retail store where we have this guy who is just to be called the custodian welcoming Jim in and giving him this jumpsuit that is to be from a guy named Daryl. And they're mentioning how Daryl smells and whatever, and that Jim wants to go on and try to clean this off or get a new onesie, and the custodian doesn't want that. So the custodian is to randomly go on and leave for the night to basically say that he wants to go and sleep with his wife rather than being at this store. So he's going to go on and shut off half of the lights in the store, and Jim is thinking that like he's shutting off all of the lights. And also, here's the weird, goofy thing. In a lot of retail stores, like during the day, they would oddly not have the air conditioning on, but overnight, they would turn on the air conditioning, and that made no sense to me. They would turn the heater or the air conditioning on overnight. Which I guess that would be great, because really I would be in the store and I'm like, man, this feels wonderful. Yeah. But again, it like never made sense to me why only during at night would they turn on the air conditioning. Because a lot of other times you would have to work certain receiving jobs or back room store jobs, and it would be like an oven in there, or it would be like the coldest possible work environment you could ever work in, because there is no air conditioning or there is no heating, even in a place where the heater is really blowing on top of you, or to be like in a location where you can see the air conditioner or the heater and they're not working. They're off. You can tell. Uh, so it's like, wow, all right, great. So Jim, of course, went on to his late night duties, which I guess would be buffering the floor, which had never gone on to been explained to him on how to use that equipment. And you know what? If I had went on and done a late night cleaning job, I would never know what stuff to grab and use to clean it. And I don't understand this guy who is to take this equipment and use all of it as if he's been using it for months. Because normally, if I'm not given an exact list of a bunch of stuff to do and seeing a person use said equipment that I'm supposed to use, I would not go on and use said equipment. Like for like the buffer stuff that this guy uses, I would not use that because of course I would not be taught how to use it, so I would not use it. Because someone should teach you how to use it, or you're going to break that equipment, and that equipment is very expensive. It is. So it's better for you to go on and be trained how to use it properly and not break it, because that would probably be a thing that might, one, you have to be immediately fired from a job that you probably don't care about anyways, for, I guess, this Jim character. So Jim goes on and is to mostly mop most of the sales floor. And I'm like, man, this sales floor is so dirty that honestly, you would probably have a number of associates before the store closed, hanged back after the store is closed to clean all of this up. Because it's too dirty. Unless this is a store that is to get closed soon, then I can probably understand that. But why would you hire a cleaning person? That wouldn't make any sense. So, Jim is going on to clean this sales floor, and he supposedly gets every bit of his job done within like the first 15 minutes of him being there. So, Jim decides that he's going to go on and just like watch a movie while sitting next to this mannequin and patio furniture. I guess this is some kind of weird seasonal display that ends up getting put into the store for whatever goofy reason. A lot of times you'll go on and see a display where it's just a bunch of items to try to sell the whole store off, and I guess that this might be it. So Jim then goes on to eventually like take a bunch of items from off of a shelf to help him supposedly do his job, and that is to really just be called theft. You can at some points go on and write off certain equipment, but normally I would always go on and find some like backroom manager or some kind of manager to figure out a way to write this stuff off before using it. Where this guy does not go on and at all do that. But if anything, there's a theft happening by the end of this movie, so you can just go on and just write that off right there. So we also have Jim who goes through the entire candy aisle and starts plucking through candies and starts eating it. That is also called theft. So Jim is to also just grab food from certain aisles and put them in microwaves and just start eating them. Again, like, you would have to buy this stuff before the store opens, or before the store closes, I mean, and eventually put it in your locker and or wherever you like have like a locker room or whatever, because that's most of the time you have a locker at most retail stores, your own private one, or eventually you share it with maybe a coworker that you trust and whatever. because that's also a thing. Like if you work with a like a relative, like they usually say, "Oh yeah, you can just share her locker." Oh, okay, great. So, so I've done that a lot. So we go into this movie, and so Jim eventually is now rollerblading or roller skating through the store, which I would assume that if you roller skated through a store, you'd probably leave scuff marks all over the floor, which immediately you would have to clean up somehow. Um, so Jim is just roller skating through this store, and he all of a sudden notices Josie just in this store randomly at some point part of the store, and Jim ends up crashing into this massive, uh, like I'm assuming it's like makeup. Like he just smashes into it. I'm like, oh my god, somebody had to put that whole display up and had a lot of that had to be put on it, and this guy just knocks all of that over. Oh my god. Could you imagine though? If that was like a sunglasses display, he would probably get like a pair of like a part of a sunglass thing like in his back somewhere or whatever, because that's usually most of the time you would see like a sunglass display like in a number of just ends of aisles somewhere. So Jim goes on and sees Josie, and so Jim is now talking to Josie, and Josie was going to try and shoplift. Then she decided not to. Josie is going on and trying to do anything to get even with her father, to get her father upset. And Jim is asking Josie, it's like, well, aren't you wealthy? Like, why are you even going on and doing any of this? And again, like Josie says, it's like, well, it's all to just go against my father. So Jim is like, oh, okay. So Jim and Josie basically do the exact same thing that Jim was doing, like going on and eating food and off this microwave. They eventually talk about their history together, and that Jim had gone on through a number of classes that Josie had been in. And so Josie is to tell Jim, it's like, well, hey, like, how did you even get this job? Because, like, you're known throughout the whole entire town as this liar, this town liar. And Jim, like, wait a minute, like, everybody knows that? And Josie's like, well, yeah, like, that's the joke around town. Jim's like, wow, like, I didn't know that. And so Josie is to also talk to Jim about, like, living at home. And that he's like, and that Josie's like, well, hey, like, why are you living at home at your age? And like, don't you want the freedom of like getting a date and uh, going on and mating with them whenever you want to, and all this freedom and all this stuff? And Jim is like, well, no, like, I like to go on and like live with my family because there's always food ready to go, and like I love my family and so on and so forth. And so Josie, of course, doesn't have that. She doesn't like her father, and so like that's the only person she lives with. She's stuck with him. So Josie is to have $50,000 on her right then and there, and so Josie is asking Jim. It's like, well, hey, how about we both go on and run away together? Like, let's go and let's just run away, both of us, because we have both Jim and we have both Josie who go on to like the electronics department and playing music, and it seems like they're both dancing at the same time to this song, and Josie looks at Jim dancing and she catches him. So Josie and Jim then go on to dance together, and at some point they go on and kiss because I guess they're the only two left in this store. So by that time we finally have these two thieves who are Nestor and Gil. So, come to find out, both of these guys had went on to steal this car from two people who were doing it out in the middle of the nowhere in the woods somewhere. And so, both these guys steal this car from this couple and make their way to this store where they just somehow avoided an alarm system to get into this store to find these two people in the store and hold them at gunpoint. So both Josie and Jim are weirdly just laying down on the ground while these two thieves are just holding a gun onto them. And so we consistently have Nestor, who is looking at Josie in a weird, creepy manner, going on and like having his gun like in the like her tank top strap, and like kind of like putting this gun in and out of her tank top and kind of pointing it in very weird and goofy manners. And then so when they tell them to have these characters to kind of flip their bodies to where they're now laying on their back, we now have Nestor that again is to be very creepy about how he's looking at this girl, this woman. So finally, Jim is to tell these guys that they don't realize what kind of mistake that they have made, because this is to be the biggest drug operation that they have ever seen in their lives, and they are going to be mixed up in it. And they're like, well, what do you mean? And so they're like, yeah, like, I had gone on and taken this girl and held her hostage, and like, I'm going to go on and do this major drug operation. And so Jim then goes on and is to run to get some equipment in this electronics department, and is to say, it's like, hey, like, go on, like, do it, pull it off, do this, do that. And so all of a sudden these guys are starting to freak out, thinking that this guy is to be talking to a number of different men that are all going to miraculously show up. And so both of the guys are to say, like, well, hey, what should we do? What should we do? So Jim ends up taking the guns from these men, thinking that somebody's going to show up here and stop them from doing what they're doing. And we also had a moment where Jim was to be at this store and see the sheriff, who is talking to Jim through this doorway. And evidently this sheriff is to be with Josie's father, and they're kind of looking through a number of places trying to go on and find Josie. And Jim is like, oh yeah, like, I saw her yesterday, but I haven't seen her recently. So Jim again lied for Josie's sake. So the sheriff writes Josie off as like, well, she's probably shacked up with some kind of guy somewhere, or maybe it's a girl, or maybe it's a goat. Man, do I have to go on and consistently recite the whole, like, urban legends movie, where the dean of that movie is to go on and say, it's like, yeah, maybe he's shacked up with some kind of girl or a guy or a goat. Like, I don't know. So Jim is to take these men's guns and hold them. And so the thieves end up getting back up because they're like, hey, joke's on you, because those guns aren't loaded. And so Jim is like, ah. And so Jim does not check if the guns are loaded or not. He then gives them right back to these guys, because these guys are to now, like, establish that they're much stronger than both of these two characters. So they can easily go on and just overpower them. So Jim gives the gun back, and we have Nestor, who goes on and fires the gun to be like, ha ha ha, we lied to you. Because they tricked them, and so they need to do a whole, like, reverse thing. Like, reverse psychology, and say, like, hey, yeah, like, these guns were loaded. So eventually Josie is to come up with a plan. So Josie is to go on and ask both of these guys if either one of them are to, like, be together, or do they like women or whatever. And so Josie, of course, is to be on this horse that we see here. And as these guys are scarfing down corn dogs, which I'm sure Jim just took from somewhere. So Josie is riding this horse, and all of a sudden the quarter runs out. And so Nestor ends up getting up to give her another quarter, but Josie's like, well, I'm going to need a little bit more than that. And so Nestor goes on and jumps on top of the horse and slides back off of it. And then so now, weirdly, Nestor is on top of Josie riding this horse together as Josie is on the side that we see here, and Nestor is to be on the opposite side looking at Josie. And I thought that that was so goofy and weird. So there is like some kind of weird romantic thing going on here. And so really Josie is to come up with the idea that she wants to run off with these two men because she has enough money to do so. And we of course have Gil, who is telling Josie, it's like, well, hey, we don't need a third wheel. And Nestor is like, yeah, maybe we do need an extra. So Jim is to all of a sudden be shoved into the back room where he is to be thrown onto this conveyor belt, which of course I've used several times in a number of different jobs. Some conveyor belts are way easier to use than others. Sometimes you even have to prop up a conveyor belt to go into a truck, which is the worst possible thing to ever do in a store, hence why every other store would go on and have a way to simply have a semi-truck back up to this location, and you would just open this door, and voila, you can easily get all of the stuff from the perfect opening to be able to get all of the truck items. But a lot of times the thing that would have to connect between the semi-truck and, of course, this store, a lot of times, this kind of lift thing, normally would be broken. There is always, like, some problem with the lip of it, or, like, the whole thing would just somehow or another just be broken ridiculously often, to the point where it's just like, seriously? This is just like the perfect end of a day or whatever of a day. And stuff like that would just happen a lot. So, anyways, we have the thieves who go on and chuck all of these items into this vehicle. And what ends up happening is Josie ends up going on and stealing this vehicle and running away with it. Jim goes off to run off to find this shotgun that I guess Target sells. I guess a store has a shotgun, I guess. So, we also had a moment where both Josie and Jim were trying to run from the thieves before, and they hid in this dressing room, or this fitting room, and the guys did not end up seeing where they were, and so eventually when they start walking through the store, the guys end up, like, seeing where they are again and then getting to them. So we have Josie who drives off with this car, and so Jim ends up going on and shooting this shotgun at the thieves to eventually terrify them to put down their guns and have Jim tie them up in this store. So the sheriff ends up waiting till this store opens the next day to go on and find these two thieves all kind of tied up into these lawn chairs with these newspapers on them stating who they are. So the next thing we end up seeing is both Jim and Josie in this car now with all of these items, and they are of course to now like showcase to us that they're just going to run away together and pawn possibly all the stuff that they had not stolen, but the other guys did. And they're going to run away together and live happily ever after. So that is the meat and the potatoes of what ends up happening with this film. So with that said, I'm going to try to quickly get out of here because I realize that this is an hour and 20 minutes of film, and I've almost gotten to 50. So with that said, goodbye everybody. Goodbye everybody. Hopefully I went through most of this film. I tried to do it as quickly as possible, but there was a number of things that I had forgotten and had to go on to talk about. And with a film as thin as this is, it's surprising that I got this under 50 minutes. I was really expecting like 20 minutes, but stuff happens in this film that I have to describe. So, goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.